listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you, and welcome to this second special episode of the afternoon briefing on the Jeffrey Epstein fallout and the increasing pressure to expose those involved in one of the biggest sex trafficking rings in history. Today, another key development. The family of Australian survivor Virginia Guiffre, who died earlier this year in WA, has released a statement after concerning new comments from the US President Donald Trump. Here is what Mr. Trump said when he was asked about Miss Guiffre.
People that work in the spa, I have a great spa, one of the best spas in the world at Mar-a-Lago, and people were taken out of the spa, hired by him. In other words, gone. And other people would come and complain, this guy is taking people from the spa. I didn't know that. And then when I heard about it, I told him, I said, listen, we don't want you taking our people, whether it was spa or not spa. I don't want him taking people. And he was fine. And then not too long after that, he did it again. And I said, out of here.
Mr. President, did one of those stolen, persons, that include Virginia Guiffre?
I don't know. I think she worked at the spa. I think so. I think that was one of the people. Yep. He stole her. And by the way, she had no complaints about us, as you know. None whatsoever.
Miss Guiffre's family has released a statement to NBC News in America, and here is part of that statement read by an actor.
It was shocking to hear President Trump invoke our sister and say that he was aware that Virginia had been stolen from Mar-a-Lago. It makes us ask if he was aware of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal actions. The government and the president should never consider giving Ghislaine Maxwell any leniency. Ghislaine Maxwell is a monster who deserves to rot in prison for the rest of her life for the extraordinary violence and abuse she put not just our sister Virginia through, but many other survivors, who may number in the thousands.
Today we are joined by British-Australian journalist Lucia Osborne-Crowley, who was in court when Ghislaine Maxwell was on trial and convicted. Lucia alleges Maxwell knows the powerful people involved in her and Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring, and that she will, name names, allowing Ghislaine to get a presidential pardon and walk free. Lucia, let's start with Donald Trump's role in the Jeffrey Epstein controversy and the increasing pressure for his administration to release the so-called files. We know that Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump were close friends or associates a long time ago. They apparently had a falling out. But as part of President Trump's election promises before he got back into the White House, he promised to release the Epstein files, which was supported by his MAGA power base. Then in a bombshell development in early July, the Department of Justice claimed there was no client list regarding Epstein or credible evidence that Epstein had blackmailed prominent individuals. This was an extraordinary development. Knowing what you know about this whole case, could you believe it?
No, I mean, it was a huge shock, but also it was very carefully worded. So there's a lot of really strange things going on here. But one of them is this idea, and, I don't know whether this was orchestrated by the Trump campaign or not, but Trump's political commitment to releasing information about Epstein turned into conversation about a client list. Now, there's never been any evidence that Jeffrey Epstein kept such a list. He certainly had a contact book. He certainly had lots of information about the people that he associated with. But there's never been any credible suggestion that he kept this list. So what happened was people started talking about a list, and then the Department of Justice was able to say the list does not exist. But that doesn't mean that the files don't exist. So what they said in that release was not that there are no files. They said there is no client list. But those of us close to this case already knew that there was no client list. Certainly not one that was ever on Pam Bondi's desk. A lot of people are calling for an immediate release of those files. I'm not one of those people. These victims have been through so much already. They've been let down by investigators and the government for 30 years in some cases. And the evidence that they would have given to authorities when the FBI was planning to rearrest Jeffrey Epstein was given on the condition that it would be sealed in perpetuity. Now, the victims have the right to have that promise kept by the government. They have never had a promise kept by the government. So it needs to go through the proper legal channels, which is that every person who's given evidence has a chance to object to the files being released and has a chance to make redactions in order to protect their safety and privacy. So that's just a little side note about releasing the files. But it's also important to know that we shouldn't accept this line from the Department of Justice that they don't have anything they can release. That's certainly just not true.
So with the information they've got to release, Lucia, I find this very interesting because when you go back and look at the investigation with Jeffrey Epstein, when they raided one of his properties, they seized a lot of confidential documents, including apparently very confidential information within a safe. And there were always allegations that these incidences of abuse with very high-profile people were recorded with videotapes, that there were hidden holes in the place where video was being recorded. Do you believe those tapes exist? And do you think we will ever see what is on those tapes?
I think it's very, very possible that those tapes exist. Certainly, people that I've spoken to who were around at the time believe that there was video recording going on. You know, I haven't been able to speak to anyone who can say that for sure. Certainly, people say that Jeffrey Epstein and associates would kind of talk about this kind of thing. So I think it's very possible they do exist. We also know that when Epstein was arrested in 2007, the authorities arrived at his house and he had a whole computer hard drive that was missing. You know, the governing theory is that he'd been tipped off, that he was about to be arrested, and he got rid of that hard drive. Now, that has never been recovered. I don't think there were particularly rigorous attempts to recover it at the time. So it's possible that we might never know, you know, what he was trying to hide from authorities and what was on those hard drives. We've had people come forward saying that they worked in IT for Jeffrey Epstein and they have access to the videos. But then there was a very strange thing where the New York Times kind of decided that this person wasn't genuine, and then he kind of disappeared. So there's lots of very strange things going on in terms of these videotapes. I've spoken to lawyers who say that they've seen them. It's just, you know, it's very hard to know. But I think ultimately, it's certainly possible that he did this, that he kept images or footage of people for blackmail purposes. I think whether we'll ever see them is a different question.
So let's talk about the developments over the last couple of days. We've seen another bombshell twist in an explosive article published in the Wall Street Journal. Donald Trump has come out threatening to sue the owner, Rupert Murdoch, where there are allegations that story was leaked to the Wall Street Journal by Ghislaine Maxwell's family, saying basically a warning shot. I know people, I know all the information, I will name names. If President Trump, you do not pardon me. The Department of Justice went and met Ghislaine Maxwell almost immediately. Does Ghislaine know the whole story? Does she have the tapes? And will she name names? And secondly, will she receive a presidential pardon?
Firstly, yes, I believe she does know the whole story. We saw mountains of evidence that she was very, very involved in this ring, very, very involved with organizing, you know, identifying victims and arranging this sexual abuse ring. So I think she does know. She told us at trial through her defense lawyers that she didn't know. I don't think that's true. I think she certainly does. I don't necessarily know whether she would have the tapes or not. What's very frustrating is that she has been asked to cooperate with this investigation many times, and she has always refused to do so. She has never answered the government's questions about who else was involved in this. So now, obviously, she's in a very different situation because she can see a presidential pardon at the end of this road. So all of a sudden, she's very willing to be helpful. So I think that she will do whatever she thinks it will take to get that presidential pardon. I think she will name names, and I think it is very possible that he will pardon her. I think it's one of those things where legally he has the power to do it. They are setting up a political narrative around it that would justify it. So what I'm seeing is more and more information that seems to be setting up a story where he can say she deserves a pardon because she helped catch these criminals. That's what's being set up, essentially. And the only thing that would stand in the way of that happening is kind of political blowback. So if he can get away with it with his base, then I think he will do it. And, that would serve his interests because presumably he would want her to say that he didn't do anything criminal connected to Jeffrey Epstein. So we have a really worrying situation here. And this is made more concerning by the fact that the Department of Justice went to meet with her, but they didn't do it in a way that we would expect. Usually they would send the investigators that worked on Ghislaine's trial and who have defeated every one of her appeals, who know the evidence. The reason they would do that is because those people know what they prove and what the evidence shows, so they will know if she's lying. So usually you would start this kind of conversation with questions where the investigators know the answer and they're testing whether she's lying to them. They didn't do that. They sent Todd Blanche, which is very unusual. Todd Blanche used to be Trump's personal lawyer. He is now the Deputy Attorney General, but there's nothing to say that he's not acting in both capacities when he's sitting there with Ghislaine Maxwell. We think that there was no one else with him. Very, very unusual. You would expect to have several FBI agents there taking notes. I've seen lots of those notes are used in court all the time. There will be none of that for this conversation. So we have no way of knowing what happened in that room, what the negotiations were. So it's all very, very alarming. And also important to point out, she has been charged with perjury, several counts of perjury. And the authorities have said that they know that she was willing to lie under oath. So she's not a particularly credible witness in terms of naming names. So I think she will. And I think as long as the politics are in favor of giving her a pardon, I think he will do that. The question then is, can we believe the names that she gives us? Or are they just the product of a political negotiation to name Trump's political enemies and to not name him?
Lucia, for you, we saw a very concerning development this week with President Trump. He was on his way back from Scotland. He was being interviewed by journalists on Air Force One. President Trump alleges that Jeffrey Epstein and he were very good friends and had a fallout over Jeffrey Epstein allegedly stealing staff. But when he was questioned about these young women that were the staff at the Mar-a-Lago spa, he was questioned by the journalist, was Virginia Guiffre one of those staff members? And President Trump very bizarrely initially said, I don't think so, but then kind of said, yes, she was one of the staff members. What's your reaction to that? That's basically admitting so much that he initially denied.
I mean, it's a very strange piece of audio and I don't really know what he was doing because as you say, he kind of turns around within kind of the same breath, the same sentence. So I'm not sure. It's, we know that Virginia did work at Mar-a-Lago in the spa. So it could be that he's trying to lean on something that is true in order to make himself seem more credible. But, this idea that Jeffrey stole her from him obviously doesn't help the way he looks in terms of this, especially we have that quote from him saying, we both like women on the younger side. So I have no idea what he's thinking. My only thought is, that that it occurred to him that she did actually work at Mar-a-Lago and that is something that is true. And so he could use something factual. But then where it went after that, I really don't know. I think he's very panicked. I think he's very, very panicked. And I think he's saying things that are not planned or strategized, to be honest.
Lucia, my final question to you is, as many of us know, as you personally know, of course, and being in that courtroom with Ghislaine Maxwell, some form of justice is so important for survivors and victims. How do you think this will end?
Again, it's such a good question, and I really wish I knew. I think there's a couple of different things that could happen now. I think this attention around these other co-conspirators and President Trump in particular, I think it could spark, and we have seen this with the Wall Street Journal, it could spark some really important investigative journalism to kind of put things out in the public domain that maybe hadn't been before. And then that could lead to more pressure on authorities to bring charges and indict new people. That's what I really hope. I say that because, it would be ideal if the authorities did this, of their own volition. I don't believe they will. I don't think a Trump Justice Department has any institutional will to investigate this.
We really appreciate your time, Lucia. Thank you so much for everything that you do, being an advocate for so many survivors and victims. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was journalist Lucia Osborne-Crowley. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. And we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.